And I think that what you have to realize, which I know you do, there's no going back. All you can do is go forward. So we take what we have right now with where we are, and we make the best of it. And listen, I got 5 kids. So when I was getting beat up like that in 2017, it was important for me to show my kids what resiliency is about and how to be resilient.
Hi everyone, this is Rob Ocasio, and today I'm joined by Anthony Scaramucci, Managing Partner and Founder of Skybridge Capital. In this episode, we discuss how to navigate brutal markets and Anthony's journey through the challenging path of being an entrepreneur. Anthony also gives us his take on cryptocurrencies and how we should think about the current market and political landscape, which is super volatile and needs a lot of fortitude. You won't want to miss out on this episode where Anthony shares his story of taking extraordinary risks in working even for the Trump administration. So tune in. It's one of my favorite episodes. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Over the Wall. And today I'm here with Anthony Scaramucci, amazing American entrepreneur, political consultant, was at Goldman Sachs early in his career, but left, started his own hedge fund called Skybridge Capital. And if you don't know the SALT conference, it's like the conference for investors in the world. And probably most of you know him because he made a trip to the White House under the Trump administration. But I want to have him here because there's so much that's going on in the world of finance. And we're here on June 13th, where it seems like the market is in another free fall. Normally, we don't talk about the markets on the show. But as an entrepreneur, I think it's more about resilience. And probably all of you are going through, whether you run a private company or like me, run a public company, or like Anthony, you're running money, investing capital. We're all dealing with uncertainty. And it's just great to have Anthony on the show. Anthony, thank you for being here.
It's great to be on. I was thinking of the name of this show. It's like could be called Running Through the Wall, because that's unfortunately what we have to do sometimes.
So why don't we start? It's interesting. I normally don't try to embrace the day, but it's interesting to embrace today. The markets and crypto got really hit over the weekend. And maybe it's a good place to start on what's your perspective, not just on the markets, but this is a time of uncertainty. And maybe you could talk about how you deal with that and how you think about that and the things that have happened in your life to get you here, because you've been very successful. You've gone through a lot of different corrections in life. So maybe we can start there.
Well, I mean, just probably a little bit of perspective. So, this is my 8th bear market. I lived through the 87 stock market crash when I first got on Wall Street. And obviously there was a 94 debacle, a 98 debacle. We had the tech wreck in 2000. You had the 9/11 debacle. And then, of course, you had the great global financial crisis. And so for me, in the beginning, I was super frightened, Rob. I made all of the classic bad decisions, overreacting to my emotions and all the fear that I had of my personality. And so I guess I'm sitting here now with my 8th bear market. I have a decent amount of cash. I'm unlevered, and I have positions on in things like Bitcoin and Ethereum, which I've watched round trip now over the last 18 months, more or less. And so you could be philosophical about that, or you can be realistic. I'm going to choose realism over philosophy. And I'm just going to say, are the use cases going up? Is the world going to advance using Web3 as a technology? Are we going to delayer the society by having more peer-to-peer interactions and doing peer-to-peer transactions and so forth? And so if we are, then I'm very happy. I'm going to sit where I am. I'm in an unlevered position. I like where I am, and I'm going to ignore the current market drama. If you don't think that, then obviously we're on the wrong side of this thing, and we should liquidate. But I think ultimately it's about asset allocation. So if you're sized appropriately, if I have a 5% position on in Bitcoin, it trades to zero. It's not the end of my world. I've got 95 other cents that I can work with to make things happen. But if I'm right about Bitcoin long term, these short term volatile price movements won't matter. And so I'll just finish up by saying this last thing. Amazon went from 113 to 6 back in 2000. And Jeff Bezos, at the 20th anniversary of his public offering, this is going back 5 years ago in 2017, he was asked by somebody, what were you thinking? He said, well, the fundamentals were there. So you're in a situation right now where a lot of really good things are happening, but current market sentiment is very, very negative. And so you have regulation coming out, the Loomis Hildebrand legislation. You've got Fidelity moving into a 401k product. You have several ETF cash applications before the SEC right now. Looks like the CFTC is really going to be the one that runs the Bitcoin regulation. So, for me, I'm sitting here pretty optimistic, but I'm unlevered and I'm paid to be patient. If you're not patient, you can't be in this market. I tell people, Rob, everybody's a short-term everyone is a long-term investor until they have short-term losses. The minute they have short-term losses, they flip out and they start running around like their hair is on fire. I just think it's a mistake.
So let's talk about it, because you said something earlier in this conversation, which was like when you didn't know better, when you've been through 8 of these now, 8 or 9 of these, you said like there was things I did that were mistakes when you acted on emotion. And maybe that's a good place to start. Like, what did you act on? What were you doing that now was not aligned to long-term, I assume, value creation?
Well, unfortunately for me, I grew up in a bull market, right? So I'll take you back to the 1990s. We had periods of time where we were going up 25, 30% at a clip. So 94, 95, 96, 97, I was levered into those markets. Okay. So I made a lot of money as a young man, which was great in some ways and horrific in others, because what it does is you start to confuse brains with a bull market. And so you start to think that you're way smarter than you are. And I got the living daylights beat out of me in 1998 when, you may remember this, the Russian ruble, the Russians were defaulting on their debt. You had the Taiwan or the Thailand bot crisis, and I lost 30% of my portfolio in 1998 over a 6-week period of time, and I was paralyzed. And by the way, the markets only went down 15, but I lost 30 because I was levered and long, and I was certain. And so that drubbing really gave me some perspective. It was very humbling. And frankly, thankfully, the 1998 drubbing that I took prepared me for 2008 because I had much better risk management, much better assessment of what's going on. So, when you talk about entrepreneurship and money management, they are very similar. You have to take risks. To start your business, and congratulations on it. You had to take risks. You probably had a series of doubters. You had probably a series of people that said, what the hell are you doing? How are you going to go leave whatever you're doing and go from 0 to 1? How is that going to happen? And so you had all these doubters and all this uncertainty. So you have to take exogenous risk. But then the flip side is you got to be very cautious with the cash flow, because as you're starting to make the money, you don't want to be too ebullient with the money. You don't want to overspend or get yourself into a reckless position. Or overbelieve your success. And so, it's like we were talking about before we went live on your podcast. It is way harder than people think. We can sit there and we can give a rah-rah speech or a TED talk about the great disciplines of entrepreneurs and things like that. But the truth of the matter is you're falling off a cliff and you're trying to build an airplane while you're descending from the cliff. And so there's a lot of stress involved with that. There's a lot of harrowing situations. I wouldn't change it for anything in the world, though, because I have, I guess I've lived on that adrenaline, and I've also felt that I could never really work for anybody. So I've got to go work for myself.
Why did you want to work for yourself? I like to always find out why. Why did you want to work for yourself? You went classically, not classically. You went into Harvard Law, which is one of the best law schools. Obviously, you always say the 2 things I learned is, I guess one of those is not to be a lawyer. You learned there, but you could have went more of a classic route, but you took an entrepreneurial route. And so why? What do you think that was? I continue.
So, Yeah, well, I mean, the short answer to that is I didn't really fit in. You have to be honest, okay? Your last name's Locasio, right? So I didn't really fit in, okay? So I was where I mean, there was one Goldman Sachs partner, may his soul rest in peace. I'm at a dinner party with him, and he brings me into his bathroom, and he wants me to fix the faucet because I'm Italian, and I guess I know how to fix faucets. Of course, I didn't know how to fix the faucet, but I did get my cousin over to his house to fix the faucet. And I was like, all right, this guy's got me sized as somebody that should be landscaping the yard as opposed to like working inside the place, right? So, and I'm smart enough to realize that I didn't have the kabuki handshake. I didn't go to the boarding school. I started out in polyester. Frankly, I thought that was a nice suit from Cy Sims. My dad was a crane operator. My mom was a housewife. So I had a good education. I went to Harvard, but I never really felt like I fit in. So my thing was, okay, I don't really fit in. Let me see if I can create something that fits me as opposed to trying to fit in. And one of my mentors said to me once, I don't know if you know who Mario Gabelli is, but he's a brilliant money manager. He said to me, listen, you're going to want to work. I was 30 years old. He said, listen, if you're going to try to stay at Goldman, you have to shave all the sharp points off your personality, and you got to get a fit into a box known as Goldman, which is going to be impossible for you to do given your personality. Moreover, you're going to want to work when you're 50 years old because you come from a family of workers. And if you don't start your own business, by the time you're 50, Goldman's going to put you out to pasture because either you're running Goldman, which is one guy out of several thousand, or you're going to be out to pasture. And you'll be better off starting your own business. And I took that to heart. And so when I went home from that lunch, I wrote down in my little goals book, I still have it actually, and I wrote down in the book that the day that I pay off my school debt, I would leave and start my own company. And so I paid that debt off in May of 1996. It was 7 years after I graduated from law school. So that was my Tufts and Harvard debt. And I started my first company in December of 1996. And so I was 32 years old. And again, we got very lucky. We started the company. I had a great partner. He's now retired. And we were in a raging bull market. And so 1996 ended well. 1997 was better than 1996. I made a ton of money in 1997, and then I got destroyed in 1998. And so, but I had enough money where I was able to see myself through it, and I was able to survive. And it prepared me better for where we are today.
But there's usually like I had my first company. I graduated in '90, and then I worked for about 6 months, and I got fired because the company restructured. It was a big conglomerate. It was during the recession. Mm-hmm. And then I said, I'll never work for anyone again. I didn't want to work for somebody. Like the idea, I got fired by fax, by the way, because somebody in Australian company sent faxes around the world of who should be fired. I picked the fax off the fax machine, saw my name, gave it to my boss, was like, I have to give this to you. I don't want to. He's like, what the hell is this? They're firing you by fax. And I said, I don't want to be part of a company that does, I don't have control over my life. But then I started the company that now is a live person. But I slept on a couch for 2 years. It was miserable. And I had a lot of introspective life lessons and learnings and doubt. Did you ever have that in that period when you lost? Like, or because you didn't just go from, it sounds like you went from like, oh, and I had some money and I started again. Like, what do you remember what that was like?
No, listen, I was scared out of my mind. I went from a great organization, Goldman Sachs, to no organization. I had to figure out everything from the computer systems to the Pitney Bowes machine to the rent to all of the different things, the insurance for the healthcare for my children. I had 2 kids at the time that I started that company. I remember being scared out of my mind, actually. But I also remember thinking to myself, I really need to try to do this. I won't be able to live with myself if I don't try this. Even if I'm not successful at it, I have to at least try it, because if I don't try it, I won't be able to live with myself. And I'm very happy I tried it, but I'll leave you with this thought and you'll get a kick out of this. So I was doing well in the first year. One of my buddies from Goldman came to visit me, and oh, you're doing great. And I'm going to go leave Goldman. I'm going to go start my own business and blah, blah. And I looked at him. I said, okay. I said, can I show you my summer house? He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I want to show you my summer house. He says, okay, yeah, great. So I got up from the chair and I walked down the hallway and I opened the server closet. There was about $1.5 million of computer servers in there that were running the trading and the operational systems and all the account management. And I said, so that's my summer house. Okay. So meaning I don't have a summer house. I had to put all the money that I made into the server closet. Right. And I said, if you're willing to put your summer house into the server closet, then, you should probably leave and start your own business. But if you like that Hamptons house that you have, you're probably not going to be able to do it, at least at this stage in your career. You see what I mean? And the point being, you either have that in your personality or you don't. I didn't need to be at the cocktail parties impressing people. I walked into one cocktail party, Rob. I will never forget this. One of my colleagues from law school, he went on to become a Goldman Sachs partner, very successful guy, but I had just started my business. And, I had been fired once before, even before the White House. We can talk about that as well. He looked at his wife. He said, well, I look at me. I haven't failed at anything. Unlike Anthony, he's failed at so many different things. And I looked at her. I said, yeah. I said, but I'm living, if you're not failing a little, you're not really living. You're not pushing yourself to where you can go, people are fear-based. I'm not fear-based. I'm adrenaline-based.
Right. And I guess you kind of sounds like you subscribe to the same perspective, which is that the more you push yourself into new areas, the more you have a higher probability of failing. If you just want to stay in a box and do what you know, and building a business is about risk-taking and going into new areas, right? But when you think about your biggest failure when you went into a new area, obviously there was the third year of your business where things went down, the market went down, you lost. But is there another time in your business that you're like, or was that the only time, or was another time, or what's the biggest time that you felt like?
No. Listen, unfortunately, we have near death experiences on Wall Street because of the way these things work. And you're managing your business for growth, but it's a little bit like a steel plant. It's way more cyclical than we would like to believe it is. And so when it's going up, we see it as a growth thing. And when it's going down, we see it as, okay, it's the end of the world. It's going to turn into the Rust Belt. And neither of those things happen. So you have to be very cautious on the way up because you have to manage the downside, which of course we're doing right now. But no, I would say 2008, I really thought I was going out of business. So I had built my first company, sold it in 2001. I went to work at a place called Neuberger Berman, who bought the company. Neuberger then got bought by Lehman. I was at Lehman for about 2.5 years. Nice place. I left in 2005 to start Skybridge. When I left Lehman, if you said to me, well, you know what, Skybridge is going to make it through the 2008 financial crisis, but Lehman is going to go out of business, I would have never, ever, ever believed that. But a lot of things happened, and Lehman had too much leverage on. It went out of business. We survived it. But there was a period of time back in March of 2009 when the S&P and the NASDAQ cracked over 55%. I said, okay, we're not going to survive this. I'm going to have to cut staff and I'm going to have to prepare this thing for its dissolution. And so we started doing things that were unique. We started a conference business. You mentioned it. It ultimately went on to become the SALT conference. It's a 15 or 14-year run now. We started a outreach and ended up acquiring Citibank's fund-to-funds business. We merged it into Skybridge. That was a very unique asset for us that worked out quite well. After the pandemic started, we moved into cryptocurrency. It doesn't feel like it's working out right now because the cryptocurrency markets are down, but we entered the space. I think our first Bitcoin purchase was at 16,000. And now we may round trip that and get to 16,000. It feels like we will. But I can't predict that. It could also, these inflation numbers could be better by the end of the year. It's quite possible because we're coming out of the pandemic and the supply chain will start to link up more appropriately. And you may have better inflation data, which, the market's not pricing right now. The market's pricing a full-on bear market, a recession, and the market is pricing the Fed raising rates several hundred basis points from here. Now, all of that may happen, and we have to be prepared for that, but it may not. There's a lot. That's the interesting part about what's going on. We can't predict it. When I thought we were going out of business, Rob, we were about to start the greatest bull market run that I've had in my life. I mean, right at that inflection point, I said, okay, are we going out of business, yes or no? I vote yes, we're likely to go out of business. We started an upward trend that was probably the best that we saw in my entire 30-year career. So it's very hard to predict.
I often think
and you have to be prepared for both. You can't sit there and pretend that you know anything, because the world is very, very humbling. If you said to me we were still going to be mired in a pandemic 2 years after it started, which we basically are because of whatever's going on here in the United States, there's a zero COVID strategy in China, which is totally disrupting the supply chain, right? So we're still in the vestiges of the pandemic, whether we like it or not. If you said to me, okay, well, that in conjunction with that, we're going to be a war. There's going to be an Eastern European war where the Russians are going to invade Ukraine, and that's going to exacerbate the supply chain issue, cause an energy crisis. Oil is going to go through the roof. Gas is going to go to $5 a gallon, and you're likely going to have a food crisis because you can't get the wheat out of the breadbasket of Eastern Europe, known as the Ukraine. So I would have not predicted any of that. So I got all of that wrong as well. But I mean, if you look at long-term trends, I like where we are, because I think we get through these things, and I think that the thing known as the blockchain or the cryptocurrency space, I think that's going to be a very big part of our future. It's just a matter of when.
So let's talk about that. We're doing a lot because we're a technology company in Web3, and I'm a believer, probably like you are, that it's the next platform, and it also is going to clean up a lot of what the Web2 platforms have done to us, which ownership of our data, decentralization of companies. It just seems like it has a lot of promise to set us free, and move us as I'd say society forward, because technology platforms usually do that on some level, right? So from your perspective, how do you view it? Because you invested in, and it sounds like you didn't invest it because you believe in Bitcoin as a replacement to gold. You probably invested because you think there's something here on the technology side.
I never said that. I never said it was an inflation hedge or a store of value or digital gold or anything like that. I said it could be that. As the user base expands and as it becomes part of the artifice of our financial system, if there's 1 billion or 2 billion wallets, could it start to trade with greater stability? I believe it could. Take Amazon as an example. Amazon had a cardiac arrest going, and then it started to mature and seasoned, and now it's institutionally owned. Look, it's down 20 or 30% in line with the market over the last 12 months. But the point being, it is way less volatile, way more stable than it was when it originally started. So to me, I believe that Bitcoin is an early stage technological asset that requires adoption. You only have 2.5 to 3% market saturation. And you have to see the future. You have to be taking a leap of faith that at some point we will move to a peer-to-peer, permissionless transaction economy. If we're doing that, then Bitcoin's going to have a big part of that. Ethereum will have a big part of that. There'll be some other cryptocurrencies that have a part of that. But it won't be all of them. There's 8,000 currencies. Will some of them go in a full-on wipeout where those projects go to zero? Yes, I believe that can happen. I think that this is the positive side of a bear market. You'll start to see things get wrung out. You'll start to see valuations that are way more attractive. And if people are patient from these levels, I think they can do very well. But that requires patience. And a lot of people don't have patience, frankly, which is why this is such a hard game, because they get impatient and they get scared. A combination of impatience and fear are two of the worst things you can do as an investor. But, for me, when I step back, it's early technology. I want to own it. I want to own it appropriately. So again, if I have a 5% position, I'm not in a wipeout perspective. If I've made you invite me on 3 years from now and you say to me, what did you get wrong? I'll say, well, if Bitcoin's at zero, I'll say, well, this is what I got wrong and this is why I was wrong. But I could be sitting here 3 years from now with you and you can say, okay, how did you have the strength to see through that? And of course, I'll say to you, Rob, well, we never know. I'm humbled by markets and life, so I don't know the answer, but I tried to pick a number from an allocation perspective that I could hang on to, irrespective of what was going on in the markets.
Did your fund, so we think it takes a more balanced approach, right, to investing? Yeah. Isn't that the heart of and so you may not have high returns and low losses, right? You're kind of like, that's kind of a philosophical
thing. We have a great
thing.
Long-term track record. We're trying to get, a 7-8-ish% return over very long periods of time. We're trying to do that with modulated volatility. And so we've added Bitcoin, so that's increased our volatility, but we believe in Bitcoin long-term. I have a lot of hedge funds in that product. I have some private placements. I don't know if you know Sam Bankman-Fried from FTX, the legendary 30-year-old billionaire who's running that company. That's one of our largest private investments. I think that's going to be a home run for us. He's making money even in this market. He's a brilliant guy. And so for me, it's high quality hedge funds, a few macro bets on like a Bitcoin or an Ethereum, and patience. And that's basically what has allowed us to be reasonably successful. But I'll tell you what, there is nowhere to hide in a market like this. So when you're an entrepreneur, you could do everything right. You could go to every meeting, you can meet every person, you could do everything right. But what I know from markets, I can't time the markets. That I know. Because if you miss the 10 best days of the market, you might as well not even be in the markets because you're screwed. If you told me in March of 2009 where we were going, I would have said lower. We had a 20% moved higher. Okay, the end of the world is here. We're going lower. We had a 20% move higher. And thank God I didn't sell anything because I held the positions and they went up. You see what I mean?
But don't you think back then the difference is today a little bit, which is I think the challenge is that the government really played a hand, and they played a hand during the pandemic to kind of keep the engines running, print money, put it into the system. And right now they can't do it unless they want inflation to go God knows where. So it's like they've backed off the market. They've backed off being the support system and putting a little pin, more than a pin in the bubble. So, I mean, it feels like, I don't know where it bounces, but usually they seem in the last couple of cycles to be the creator of the bounce, or I don't know what you think, but I don't know when they're going to step in. Like, where do they step in and say, like,
that's the issue right now because they don't want to step in. They inducted too much money. Ultimately, Larry Summers was actually right. He was calling for a more cautious stimulus package. We reduced our labor participation. People got money from the government, said, okay, I don't have to work. And then they bid up, they bid these things up. And so you've got inflation. Then you have the administration. I'm not trying to make this political, but I don't know why we're asking for help from the Saudis. Why aren't we in West Texas drilling more oil? But in other words, if you're worried about the environment, the world is such where if you're drilling in Saudi, it's the same environment. It doesn't matter. So if you need the oil and we're still dependent on it, why aren't we allowing the Americans to drill more? So you really upset the apple cart. So you've got an administration that I think is indifferent to the stock market, which I think is a mistake because it's all tied in. There's a harmony and a connection between Main Street and Wall Street. And so I think that's a mistake. And then they're making these decisions which are virtue signaling decisions as opposed to practical decisions for the economy. So you have a combination of really wicked things happening at the same time. And without help from the government, these downturns, they go 30, 40, 50%. They don't go down, down 20. When we were down 25 in March of 2020, the Fed stepped in and said, okay, listen, nobody's fault here. We're going to induce some money into the system. We're going to lower rates. We're going to do everything we need to do to get the market to calm down. Of course, the market did. We went on an unbelievable bull tear, but they're not prepared to do that right now. And I get it. The administration definitely thinks they're going to get sunk by inflation, and they would rather hit the stock market where they feel the common person owns less of that, and they're getting hit at the gas pump more than they are the stock market. But unfortunately, exactly, Rob. Well, you know this because you're a market participant and an entrepreneur. They're tied together, and I think the administration is making a mistake by doing that.
Yeah, I think the big part is you have people like my mom who are on fixed incomes, right? Who have their money in the market and they rely on that and now they got the pump. And there's a lot of people in that age group in our society that are sitting there and they're like getting hit by the pump and getting hit by the stock market. So it's a little bit of a, and there, you and I, we keep working and we keep making money and we can pivot. It's harder as you get up to that. Or if you're someone who's in a different socioeconomic, you can't get there. You're just paying the pump prices. So it'll be interesting, what happens at the end of this. I don't know politically, obviously, and I want to get into that, where you think this will all fall out for us. Is it going to be a revolution? That's what everyone thinks. Like eventually people revolt and the change happens. But I don't know what you think since you've been deep into politics.
So, what I'm worried about is my generation, which is unfortunate. I'm at the tail end of the baby boomer generation, has really failed the society politically. So our political class of leadership has mishandled the bounty that was bestowed upon us from the greatest generation. And so we overspent. I'll just give you these numbers from 2008 to today. We racked up $24 trillion in debt. So you went from George Washington to George W. Bush, $7 trillion. And now you're going from 2008 to today, $24 trillion. It's not sustainable. Nobody could look at that and say, okay, well, that's sustainable, because what it does is it erodes living standards, right? It becomes eventually inflationary. It becomes eventually a negative feedback loop of problems. So unless you get strong-willed political leadership that's willing to serve the American people some strong medicine, okay, in terms of what the American people need to do to reclaim the former glory, you're going to descend downward, and there's going to be a very small group of people that are very rich at the top, and the rest of the people are going to be generally unhappy. And so I don't want that to happen. I don't want to be in a McMansion living in a barbed-wired security compound while my fellow neighbors are struggling. I don't want that. Okay, so there's a way to fix that. There's a way to prevent that. Okay, but we don't have the political will. We don't have the political leadership that wants to do that. And by the way, guys like, one of my buddies, David McCormick, terrific guy, CEO at Bridgewater, went to war, was a West Pointer, arguably one of the best guys I know, an American patriot. He went to run for the Senate in his home state of Pennsylvania, and he lost to Dr. Oz. Now, Dr. Oz is probably a great guy. I don't know him personally. I'm just pointing out how hard this is. So you take a guy who could do a great job, and what you discover about the electoral process right now, it's not a hiring decision that the American people are making. It is a popularity contest, and it's subjective to a lot of weird things that are not necessarily the criteria that we should be using to pick our political leaders. So yeah, no, we're in trouble, but here's the good thing about us, okay? It's unbelievably resilient country. It's an unbelievably resilient culture, and we come up with stuff. We innovate. We have great technology advancements. I'm not going to be this naysayer, because I've seen this country turn itself around. Civil War, heal the nation after Civil War. The Depression, come out of the Depression with the post-World War II generation. We always figure out a way to solve these things. And I'll just point out that, like Thomas Malthus, who was a British economist in the 1840s. He said, hey, the world's really bleak. We're going to starve. Our population is growing exponentially. We can only grow the food linearly. And so we're going to end up starving. And he was preparing the world for that. But he missed all the technology, the vertical farming, the irrigation, the fertilizer, the genetically modified foods. We have more people, Rob, dying from obesity-related illnesses than we do from the starvation that was predicted. So I'm not going to be sitting here saying, oh, it's doom and gloom. I see AI, cryptocurrency in the blockchain. I see therapeutics, in the biotech space in terms of us unlocking the genome and all this great stuff. This mRNA technology, if it's properly utilized, there's 100 or so mammalian viruses that the American people or the world, citizens of the world, catch from nature. We are now on the cusp of being able to unlock each one of those and develop the right immunotherapy, the right immunization to protect ourselves from those viruses. So look, I think there's a very big, very positive world ahead, but I do think the American people need to sit down and say, okay, we need from our leaders 5, 10, 15, and 20-year plans. Everything's going to be okay. Trump's saying he's going to have a deficit surplus by the time he leaves office, but he spends $9 trillion in 4 years. All of this sort of stuff, we need to put an end to that. And we need somebody to come up to the American people and say, okay, here's a 10-year plan to fix entitlements. Here's a 10-year plan to fix and right-size the deficit spending. Here's how we're going to fix our K through 12 education system, which is ridiculously uneven. And here are the plans. And by the way, they're not 10-minute plans. They're not 2-year election cycle plans, but they're 10 or 15-year plans. We used to do that. You had a policy of containment. It was developed by George Marshall and Harry Truman and George Kennan. It was a 40-year plan. 40 years later, the wall came down. You had a plan to go to the moon. Jack Kennedy said in 1961 or 2, he was going to do it inside the decade, 10-year plan. Okay, we used to.
But we don't work on 10-year plans. We work it on 10-month plans and 10-week plans.
That. You asked me what was wrong, and I'm diagnosing it for you. I'm explaining to you how we could fix it. Now, we may not be able to fix it, but the good news is the innovations, the process of the free market, we still have a world of free market capitalism in this country. We'll end up fixing it despite the fact that we can't fix it, if that makes any sense to you. Meaning we'll come up with innovations that will shock people, save people money. They'll have less money to like we're at 18 to 22%, depending on how you calculate it, of the GDP is going towards healthcare. If you come up with these new immunotherapies, you could send that in the other direction. You could have we had a quote unquote peace dividend after the Cold War. You might have a health dividend that we're not fully factoring in yet because of the advancements that are being made. So to me, I'm not sitting here as a naysayer or a pessimist. I'm sitting here as a realist that has a good long-term plan. And I would tell your viewers and listeners, you got to save a little every month, because if you put a couple $100 away a month, $1,000 away every month, and you hold it in good high quality stocks and good times and bad, you'll end up with a decent amount of money, but you just have to be patient.
So I don't want to, before we run out of time, I want to talk about your big, one of the risks you took was getting into politics. You didn't get in, but I'm saying you entered an administration and although I knew you from the SALT conferences before, because I've been in the public for 22 years, but all of a sudden you're there. And I felt like it was like this foray through talk about risk and reputational risk. And I know you probably had good intentions. People were making fun of you on TV. They were like, in your name, they're making fun of your name. And, and I was kind of like, give this guy a break a little bit. I mean, I don't know you personally. It's the first time we've met, but I was kind of like, I felt like you really put yourself out there. And I don't know how you feel about it now. Obviously you made a name, you have more of a public name, but you took a lot of bruising on it. So I don't know. What do you think? What's your, looking back now? Yeah.
And I mean, it was a fucking unmitigated disaster. I mean, who's kidding who? I don't like to mince words. I mean, it was an unvarnished, ridiculous disaster. I got into politics. We were talking about having like a network or no network. I didn't have a network. When I was at Goldman and I was trying to acquire an account base as a financial advisor, I didn't really have a network. My dad was a crane operator. So I went into politics. I think I wrote my first check to Rudolph Giuliani in 1989 when I was 25 years old, Young Republicans for Rudy. And so I matured in the space of political fundraising. And so when George Bush's brother, Jeb, left the race, I'd worked for George, I'd worked for Mitt Romney. When Jeb left the race, Trump called to recruit me. I had known him casually, and I accepted his invitation to go work for him. Okay, that was obviously a colossal mistake on a number of different levels. But I did it. I was tied into the Republican Party. I thought it was the right decision at the time. When he won the election, which none of us thought he was going to win, he offered me a job actually to be the president's sort of like chief networking officer. That was the office of the liaison, like the liaison director. Reince Priebus blocked that. And so I did something really stupid and regrettable. I got my ego and my pride involved in my decision making. At that moment, I should have said, okay, Washington's not for me. Let me return to my company. Let me see if I can make a go of it in my company. But I regret, I didn't do that. I called Trump. I said, you're going to need me to clean up some of these guys out of here. Call me when you want. I'll come down there and do it. And so he did. And so I went down there, all guns a-blazing. I made a mistake, obviously, with the reporter, but it was an Italian kid from my neighborhood who I trusted. I don't blame anybody but myself. I took full accountability for it. When I got fired, I didn't blame anybody. I blamed myself. I said I made a mistake. Tried to do the right thing. You're right. I got excoriated if you're ever having a bad day, or your viewers or listeners are having a bad day, I want you to think of my day on July 31st, 2007. I was fired from the White House, lit up by the late night comedians, ripped by cable news, taken out. My wife and I were fighting. I mean, it was a unmitigated disaster. But as an entrepreneur, and I think you'll appreciate this, you have to demonstrate and exhibit resilience. You have to demonstrate and exhibit a sense of humor. When Steve Colbert invited me on a show and he's like, did you think you were going to last a long time? I'm like, yeah, longer than a carton of milk in the refrigerator. I didn't think I was going to get blown out like that. The point I'm making is that, like, you go forward. You don't wallow and you don't play the victim. And you go forward.
But I think that's important because this basic philosophy for me too. Like, there's so many people you can blame because you hire people who you trust. You have all this. You're building this level of trust, and things don't always happen with people, and they let you down. And you can spend a lot of time blaming them for the decision that you hired them and you entrust them to do something. But it seems like you also believe ultimately that doesn't get you anywhere. It just holds you down. Right? Yeah. Like, you could have sat there and just blamed everyone for your problems, but you chose it, right?
Never going to do that. I made a mistake. I made a decision, but the more risky or more consequential, frankly, was, look, I tried to stay loyal to Trump. And so I got fired by him. I didn't want to be that douche that complained or anything. So I tried. 2 years went by. He's acting crazier and crazier. Finally, I must have said something on one of these shows he didn't like. So he starts attacking me, which I thought was sort of crazy. I'm like, dude, I'm out here like supporting you. You're attacking me. So I think I called him like the fattest president since William Howard Taft or something like that, because I'm a New Yorker, right? And then he flips out. He starts going crazy, right? Then he starts attacking my wife, Rob. I mean, who does that? I mean, and I think your listeners trying to figure out that I'm not Ted Cruz. Once you're going after my family members, we got to take the gloves off and give you a pounding, right? So that was easy for me once he did that. But look, then we discovered that he was, obviously trying to undermine the American democracy. Whatever Joe Biden's shortcomings are, I would like to try to preserve the integrity of this democracy for a next generation of Americans. And so Trump clearly didn't have that in mind. So look, we're here now. I made my mistake. I took my lumps. But you know what? I probably wouldn't know you if I didn't do that. I wouldn't have 1 million Twitter followers. And I do have 1 million more Twitter followers than Donald Trump, which I think is funny. And I've done some really fun things as a result of that. I've had a lot of fun speaking engagements. I've met a lot of world leaders that I probably wouldn't have met had I not been involved. I just did a reality show in the desert with 16 celebrities called Celebrity Special Forces, where I was in a military-style boot camp for 8 days with the Navy SEALs and the British SAS. Holding my own at age 58, backflipping off of helicopters, rappelling down towers and stuff. I would have never been able to have done any of that had I not taken that risk. So yeah, some of it was humiliating. Some of it was rough and bruising. But a lot of it was beneficial. There were a lot of beneficial things that came out of it. I think that's classic entrepreneurship, isn't it? You got your butt kicked, but you're running a multiple billion-dollar company.
Yeah, and the thing is, and so I often say, like, you can't see it at the time. The door closes and everyone knows there's something. You open the next door in. It's scary to close the door, right? It's really scary to do the right thing. A lot of times you think like you did the right thing, then you started to talk about the present. You stood by your values, and ultimately that gets you through the tough times. I usually think it's God, whatever God you believe in. There's something higher than us that's out there helping us with a helping hand, opening doors. And the other one is your values. You can only live by your values, right?
100%. And I think that what you have to realize, which I know you do, there's no going back. All you can do is go forward. So we take what we have right now with where we are, and we make the best of it. And listen, I got 5 kids. So when I was getting beat up like that in 2017, it was important for me to show my kids what resiliency is about and how to be resilient, And listen, I have friends of mine that have health issues. Unfortunately, some of them have cancer. Those are real problems. Getting beat up and blown out of the White House, that's not really a real problem. A health problem is a real problem.
Yeah, someone once said to me, I had a coach who worked with me for many years, and she said to me early on when I started the company, she said, like, there's 52 cards in a deck, and if each card represented a life, and that could be everything from you've got cancer, you live somewhere in the world that's not where you live, whatever you can think of, all the horrible things and great things in the world. By the way, you're now a billionaire. You have all those things. Would you put your card back in, your life card back in, and take the risk of pulling something out? And I think for most of us, we wouldn't take that risk. Right. There's many cards worse than the card that we're dealt. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to be that guy though. And I know you do too. I want to be the guy that has the card, willing to handle the card that I've been dealt with, and also willing to see if I can reach that next level. Can I take that risk? Can I measure it in a way, take it humbly, of course, not take it with too much overconfidence or arrogance, but can I do it in a way that can make me successful? And if I can't, if I somehow fall back or I land improperly and there's a failure or a shortcoming, the game isn't over until you and I decide that it is. So I can just pick myself up, dust myself off, and keep going.
So we're at the top of the hour. I have I always end with one question with the guests, which is, do you have a little voice in your head that says things to you? And we all have this little voice, sometimes very negative, and we're trying to beat it. I've had guests on the show say, like, my voice tells me I'm stupid all the time, and I'm going to beat I'm not stupid. I'm going to beat it. Do you have a voice like that you're fighting sometimes, or it could be a positive voice?
I don't have a voice like that. I think that I have an internal drive. I definitely have an internal drive. I definitely feel like I was born with a drive. I definitely remember growing up as a kid. My parents may have been struggling with money or there was issues. I was like, okay, I got to go out there and make some money, and I got to figure out how to get my paper route going. I'll share some of that money with my parents. I always had a drive. I remember thinking, okay, if I don't do this, who is? I remember, if it's 5 o'clock in the morning, I got to get up and, go to work. I started in construction. My dad actually got me a good job in construction, which helped me pay for undergraduate school. I just remember thinking, okay, I got to do this. So I have that. If anything, my inner voice is a motivating one. It's like, oh shit, man, get your ass out of bed, attack the day. Yes, that's a bad thing that happened. Yes, you should feel bad about that for a minute, but you got to get going. I think that's more or less my
Great.
enterprise.
Well, Anthony, thank you for being on the show. You're an awesome guest, and I'm glad we got to talk about the windy road. And you're an inspiration. It's like
Well, hopefully there's more road. Hopefully there's more road
there's,
ahead.
there's much
See,
more.
I'm dealing with a wicked sunburn / tan right now from the Jordanian desert. Okay, getting my butt kicked by Navy SEALs. Again, if you're having a bad day, think of me sleeping on a military cot in the desert on a dirt floor in a tent. You sense the torture I just put myself through.
It made you stronger. It made you a better person, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like ready to fight coach all over the world now.
Well, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks a lot. Rob. Thanks for having me on.
And don't hang up.